So first, I want to tell you, I'm going to tell you an introduction to the introduction, which is that I told Karen earlier this week that I was going to be talking about vows this morning. And I already told you all, you already prepared you for some of the texts we're going to be looking at. And she said, oh, I feel like maybe that came from an idea that maybe was in the back of your head from something that happened on Monday night at Thanksgiving, at the Interfaith Thanksgiving service that we had over at Bethesda United Methodist Church. And I think maybe that's true. So we were leaving the service. It's a beautiful service. We had 5 communities represented. It was really lovely. And then we noticed there was a woman walking. It was pretty dark by the time the service was over. She was walking. It didn't look super safe. So we asked her if we could help and drive her home. And she said, sure. She got into our car and said, Toda Rabbi. And this was a Bethesda United person. And we were just like kind of shocked in the best way. Like, oh, maybe she learned, some phrases, some Hebrew phrases. But it turns out, no, she's been studying Hebrew. And in our car ride, in which was peppered with Hebrew phrases that she knew, that she was practicing her Hebrew with us, she said, there's this phrase that I heard, I can't remember. It's what you say if you're going to promise to do something, but you don't want to, you don't want to like lie. You don't want to be held accountable if it doesn't go right. Does anyone know what she might have been referring to? Bli neder, yes. So we shared that with her. That's the one Hebrew phrase she couldn't remember. She knew a lot of other Hebrew. And so we told her, like, you say bli neder, which means without a vow. I'm not promising, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to commit myself to do X, Y, or Z. But it's a phrase that is kind of protective. Like, I don't want to vow to God that I'm going to do this or vow to you. So anyway, maybe that was in the back of my head when I was thinking about today. Vows. The introduction, this is the introduction. That was the intro to the intro. The introduction, which is more serious, is that this teaching that I want to share with you all this morning is from one of my teachers from the Jewish Theological Seminary, Rabbi Eliezer Diamond, who's been ill for the last few years, and we just found out that he's now on hospice. He's in the hospital. So it looks like it's toward the end. And so I've been thinking a lot about what he's taught me and what he's really taught the world and the generations of students he's shaped at the seminary and in his life. He started his studies at Yeshiva University and then came over to Jewish Theological Seminary and is one of the most feminist people I know. Even with that background, you might not have thought that, but he really is. He's taught me a lot, not only a lot of Talmud. He was the head of the Talmud department for a long time. I did my master's in Talmud, so he was my advisor. And he also really taught so many, like he was really a mensch, the kind of person where you learn something in the hallway from him, just by how he, lets somebody on the elevator. And that's just as important, if not more, than what you learn from him, in a book of Talmud. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is I was taking a class with him on family law, which specifically like menstrual purity rules of Nida, which is not the most comfortable topic for maybe anyone to talk about, but definitely not for a man with a mixed gender group of students teaching this material. He took it extremely seriously. And I loved that whenever we were reading a text that was in the perspective of a woman, he used the first person. So he did not say, well, the woman does this, the woman does that. He used the first person because it was a hypothetical, and in a hypothetical, in every other context in Jewish law, usually we're assuming we're talking about a man. And so he thought, well, I'm in the woman's voice this time, but I'm not going to do it any differently. I'm going to speak as if I'm a woman in this situation, bringing a question about, like I said, Nida. And someone asked him why he did that, and he said, well, like he said that. He said, every other voice in our tradition almost is a man's voice, and half this more than half the class was made up of women, you all have to assume a man's voice when you speak in the first person, when you read the stories and the teachings from our tradition. So when I'm teaching this area of law, I'm not going to do it any differently, and I'm going to speak in a woman's voice, and that his way of thinking as a feminist and as a human being, I will always appreciate and think about. And like I said, we will, he's still here, but we're kind of preparing ourselves to be missing him soon. So I brought this teaching from him. Karen, thank you so much for handing it out. I'm going to share a Devar Torah in his words, but I'm going to stop at a few different places and we can have a discussion. So it's going to be kind of a hybrid conversation. But I wanted you all to have the text so you can have something to look at. So this is from the story from this morning, from Vayetze. I don't want to, I know it's distracting to have the papers being handed out. So I'm going to wait a sec. Okay. So I'm going to start with Rabbi Diamond's voice. We live in a world of give and take. Transactions involving the exchange of money for goods and services, which the rabbis explicitly call masa'u matan, taking and giving, are essential to economic life. Successful relationships, whether professional or personal, are the result of effectively balancing the pursuit of one's own needs and wants, and needs, with acknowledging and accommodating the needs and desires of others. So he's introducing this idea of giving and taking in transactions is essential to our lives. It may come as a surprise that biblical vows almost always give and take as well. And this is the first text you have up there. Hannah vows that if God grants her a son, she will dedicate him to God. So if you look at this first text, this is maybe familiar from Rosh Hashanah, another text familiar from Rosh Hashanah. Hannah is praying for a son, and she says, if you will look upon my suffering and remember me, if you will grant me a child, I will dedicate that child to God for all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head. So this is the promise that he will be a Nazirite if she's able to have a child. Another example of the next one is going to be the next text that he mentions. The people of Israel promise to donate the spoils of war to God's service if they prevail against the king of Arad and his army. And this is this text right here. The second one, Israel made a vow to God and said, if you deliver this people into our hand, we will proscribe their towns. So prescribe, literally meaning prohibit, but meaning here, to destroy the town and then dedicate the town to God. So the spoils of that will go to God. So it is a transaction. Hannah is a transaction of giving and taking, and this verse from this promise from Numbers is also another transaction or a deal. In this week's parsha, and that's the third text on the bottom of the first page, Jacob makes a conditional vow upon awakening from his dream at Bethel. Does someone want to read this one? So I don't lose my breath. Jacob then made a vow. We already looked at this one. Thank you.
Jacob then made a vow, saying, if God remains with me, if God protects me on this journey that I am making, and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safe to my father's house, the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up as a pillar, shall be God's abode, and of all that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you.
Thank you. This is the conditional vow that Jacob makes. Back to Rabbi Diamond, several of the classical commentators are disturbed by the apparently transactional character of these vows. Some cite the teaching in Tractate Avot from Pirkei Avot, do not conduct yourselves like those who serve their masters in the expectation or literally conditioned upon receiving reward. So don't do this. But we see these examples of our biblical characters, our models doing this. Is Jacob declaring that his fealty to God has a price tag attached? So what do you think? You've had a little bit of time to think about this one. Is Jacob giving a price tag to his loyalty to God? Yeah.
Maybe, but maybe he's showing, he's saying this is not a throwaway promise I'm making. It's a bilateral agreement. There's consideration here, and this is why I'm doing it. I know it's going to happen. I have faith in that, but I can't go back on it. It's really done. It's not something gratuitous.
I like that. It's a very lawyer's response, which is appropriate. So because there's consideration, because God is going to give Jacob something in return and part of this exchange, it is actually a stronger agreement. It's not just Jacob out of the goodness of his heart promising something. Because there's a deal, it's maybe more enforceable, a stronger agreement, a bilateral agreement with consideration. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, also, I guess in some ways, Jacob is also saying, like, stating his belief up front, which is that God can do these things, right? And so it's almost, even though it comes across as like, if you do this, then I'll give you this, right? Which it can be on the surface. It's also like, but I also believe that you can do this for me.
Yeah.
Which in and of itself is like a statement of belief in God. And, and then I'll show it also, but I do
Right.
believe you can do this.
I like that. So it's a way of showing, it's part of the loyalty piece. Part of Jacob showing loyalty is telling God, I believe you can do all these things. Almost giving God a chance to show off a little bit, or to prove something, or to show love, maybe.
I mean, Jacob chooses to say that God can do these things as opposed to any other thing, right? So it's, we're just taking it like, I don't know. He's putting himself in God's hands a little bit right there, which
Yeah.
which is kind of an act of faith, even if on the other end it comes off a little bit transactional.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Does anyone want to argue against? Say this is a little too transactional. It's not the way we're supposed to declare faith or follow God. Yeah.
At this point in Jacob's narrative, this is still the beginning of his story. It's true to how he's acted thus far in the transactions with the birthright and the blessing before.
True.
So he hasn't yet shown the growth that we later see from him in fully accepting God. So the transactional nature of this is how he views the world.
Yeah. Interesting. So looking at his lifespan and his growth as a person, as a character, that he's, as a kid, transactions and deals, maybe he's going to be this is a transitional moment where he's growing out of it, but it still has some remnants. Yeah. Toby.
It also feels like this transaction feels very different to me than Hannah's, right?
Okay.
Hannah is crying out in anguish, right? It's the like I tried everything, right? And so God, if you will bless me, I will give you this child, essentially, right? This feels like quid pro quo, right?
Huh.
So this feels they're both transactional, but in a very different way, right? So
Yeah. I think I can see that. Like Hannah already had an existing deep desire that she wanted God to help with, and then they made the deal. Whereas Jacob, this isn't really his idea. It's kind of God's idea. And Jacob's trying to make the most of the moment and make sure the deal is a good one.
oh, you want this? All right, well.
A little more quid pro quo. Yeah. I could see that. Yeah. Josh. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is sort of very maybe non-human, sort of not unnatural response to the world around you, and I think it's a much more human response that we're seeing from the
Yeah.
grandson.
more human response. I'm just repeating in case anyone didn't hear the live stream, a more human response, and contrast that with like Abraham's going, lech lecha, you're supposed to kind of go and totally on faith. There was no deal. I mean, there kind of was a deal that his descendants would be very numerous, but it wasn't the same as this kind of a deal. This is a little more of a human deal than the Abraham one. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, Suzanne.
That's pretty darn transactional. Think about the second paragraph of the Shema, which is an example.
Uh-huh.
This idea of covenant is very transactional, and maybe it goes two ways.
Yeah. So this Suzanne's saying it's very transactional, and it's reminding her of the second paragraph of the Shema, the one we read silently, which is, I have to say, it's a very conservative movement way to handle an uncomfortable text, because it is quite transactional. If you bless us, if you follow the mitzvot, God's saying, if you follow the mitzvot, I will bless you, and if you don't, you will be punished. So it's a very transactional part of our Shema, part of our liturgy, part of the Torah, and it's a little uncomfortable. And look, it's a lot of Hebrew, so there are a lot of reasons why we say it silently, but it's also maybe the least favorite of the three paragraphs of the Shema. Okay, yeah.
Well, I don't think that it should be taken literally, because Jacob is saying that, you got to keep me on my journey until the day that I come back to my father's house peacefully. And so that's 25 years into the future.
Uh-huh.
And is Jacob not going to recognize God for all of that time?
Right. It's a long time.
Yeah.
And so it seems more transactional because the end of the bilateral agreement is a long time in the future. So it's, yeah.
Or the beginning of the bilateral thing. It's like, you have to do these before I'm going to recognize you as God.
Right.
You're going to have to bring me all the way back to my father's home.
Right. And we know we're going to look at a different deal that Jacob makes. It also has a long timeline around his marriage later. But any other comments on this moment? Yeah.
He's already made this promise to him in the dream.
Hmm.
It says, remember, I am with you, I will protect you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you.
Interesting.
That's in the dream. Jacob wakes up, maybe has a cup of coffee, maybe wasn't sure about
He talked to his attorney and decided, and Michael, his attorney, decided he should get some consideration. Yeah. Give some consideration.
did I dream properly? Did you make this promise?
Yeah. So the promise was in the dream. Right, the promise is unconditional in the dream. And then Jacob wakes up and wants to make a deal. So that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Are you?
Thinking grammatically, I wasn't sure, but I'm glad that you pointed out that line, because sometimes is if,
Uh-huh.
sometimes is when.
Right. True.
And actually, in that very line is when.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting, first of all, it's interesting grammatically that that's true. And sometimes it's if and sometimes it's when, because maybe it's transactional, maybe it's not. Life is transactional, by the way. There are consequences, and there are, so I don't think we can say transactional like it's a bad word.
Right.
It's not necessarily, but also you can look at that word either way, or you can look at it both ways.
Yeah. So transactional is not necessarily a bad word. And you mentioned pointing us to the word im, and I was looking for it. It's right on the first line. Im yihyeh Elohim imadi. If God is with me, and if God protects me. So Arya is saying that the word im can mean in Hebrew if, or it can mean when. Either way, it's still conditional, but I would say if sounds a little more conditional than when. So there's a nuance to the word im in Hebrew. Should we continue on a little bit? Okay. So next this is from Rabbi Diamond. He's bringing a Musar point. This is not on the sheet. He says, I think that biblical vows are best understood in light of the teachings of the late Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler. Rabbi Dessler was a psychologically astute exponent of Musar, a system of religious character formation based on study, self-reflection, and behavioral conditioning. he posited that each of us is called upon to make a fateful decision. Will I be a giver or a taker? And I'm going to read a little more about what that means, and then we're going to apply it to these promises. One might object that we are all both givers and takers, but what could it mean to choose to be one or the other? For Rob Dessler, the answer lies in the manner of our giving and taking. The giver receives rather than takes, and always as little as possible. So if you're inherently a giver, when you receive, when someone gives to you, you don't take, you just kind of passively receive it, because your way is to be a giver. She expresses gratitude for what is received and uses it to enable further giving. The taker relinquishes rather than gives, letting go of no more than is necessary, and always with the goal of taking more than is given. Keeping this insight in mind, let us look more carefully at the vows made by Jacob and his fellow votaries, people who make like religious vows. They share a striking feature. The votary's promise can only be fulfilled if his request is granted. Jacob can only build an abode for God if he survives his sojourn in Aram. Hannah needs a child if she is to dedicate one to God. The people of Israel can offer to dedicate the spoils of war to God only if they prevail. Only if they prevail. In other words, so these votaries are not withholding some expression or act of religious devotion so as to use it as a bargaining chip. So he's defending Hannah, he's defending all three of these, defending Hannah at the top, Numbers in the middle, and Jacob at the bottom. They promise God that if their prayers are answered, they will not forget who it was that answered them. In each case, the promised action is a manifestation of gratitude, a larger acknowledgement that God is the ultimate source of blessing, and a commitment to use God's gifts in the spirit of generosity. These vows, these three vows, are about giving, not taking. So these, he's calling these are inherently from the stance of, in Musar, of being givers. Like a character, an approach, I don't know what the right word is, a character trait that makes your approach to giving and taking, you're more of inherently a giver. So these are what these three examples are. Later in the biblical narrative, we are introduced to a taker, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Lavan. But yeah, but before that, do you agree with this characterization that these are maybe these ways of transactional way, whether it's good transactional or bad transactional, is in the stance of being a giver, of wanting something greater. So wanting a child, wanting to dedicate a child to God's service, wanting to serve God and in the ways that the Israelites were in Numbers, to serve God in the way that Jacob plans to in Genesis. What do you think? We talked about this a little bit already, but I think we talked about how Hannah's vow maybe is a little more self-focused. She wants a child. She's desperate to have a child. So I don't know. If I'm as convinced that she's doing this as a giver, I think she really wants a child. I'm not sure about Numbers. Genesis, I think we could argue both ways about Jacob. Yeah, Donna?
Aside from the, we have had contracts from the beginning. It's, there is that quid pro quo because they're a contract-based thing from entity from the beginning. But it just seems to me that it's about process, and to the extent that one is involving a deity in this and having some sort of giving some sort of direction or purpose, it's to have humans go through a process and to encourage them to go through the process to get to the point.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the God motivation,
Right.
to get us to do that.
So do you think it's more in the posture of giving from the human side or maybe from the God side?
I don't think it's either one.
Okay.
From my point of view, and admit I'm not theist, but from my point of
Mhm.
It's not about immediate gratification. It's about putting yourself through the thoughts and the emotions and whatever it might be that give you whatever understanding you need or whatever development
Yeah.
you need to get to a place.
Thank you.
And that God's role with us is to help us be able to develop and grow by going through process.
Thank you. Okay, so this is, I think, a different model of thinking about prayer and a little differently than this transactional piece, than the giving and the taking. Very important. Thank you. Yeah, Harriet.
So if you think about it from a feeling level,
A feeling level.
I think that gratitude has something to do with Jacob or our characters in the Bible operating on a feeling level. And so when we talk about transactions, I think we have to kind of get back down to the feeling level, and it's feeling driven, and they react. So I'm just kind of thinking about it from a whole process model.
Yeah. So another different model. So there's a prayer process model, and then there's a feeling process model focused on gratitude and not necessarily the transaction, but the emotional experience, maybe. Harriet said it better, but I was recapping it. Okay, so we're going to look at, Elliot, and then we're going to look at Lavan, and then we're going to close because we're, okay, Dayenu.
Being thankful for what you have, that you don't need to get to the next thing because you have enough. But if you get more, be thankful for more. So
Nice.
be satisfied with what you have is itself an endpoint, but and there's not the need to have more.
Right.
Or be striving to keep up with the Joneses.
Thank you. Okay, so enough. The Dayenu, it's enough. So this is maybe different from the model of like giving and taking, and maybe Hannah should have just been okay without a child. Maybe the Israelites should have, I'm taking your argument to the extreme. Without being delivered, maybe Jacob should have made maybe a little bit more satisfaction with the moment. Taking it to the extreme, we wouldn't have these big moments in our tradition. But on a day-to-day level, I see the value, for sure. I mean, I think we see the value of that. Satisfaction with what we have is enough, and from our tradition comes out in the Dayenu beautifully. It's a little early for Pesach, but Dayenu. Thank you, Elliot. So, look at Lavan a little bit, or think about the Lavan story. So, Lavan bamboozles and exploits Jacob at every turn. This is the story of the deal about Jacob's wives, which we read today. When Lavan catches up with Jacob, when the latter flees his father-in-law's home, Jacob releases the pent-up anger and resentment that has accumulated. And then we get this long quote, which I'm not going to read all of it, but this is the bottom of, if you turn the page. I served you for 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flocks. You changed my wages time and again. Had not the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac been with me, you would have sent me away empty-handed. But God took notice of my plight and the toil of my hands and gave me judgment last night. And then Lavan's response. This is Jacob speaking. And then Lavan's response. The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All that you see is mine. Yet what can I do now about my daughters of the children they have borne? Lavan is willfully blind to the part that Jacob has played in tending and increasing his flocks. He's oblivious to Jacob's devotion, to his willingness to go beyond what is required in serving his employer. Jacob is nothing but a tool to be discarded after his services are no longer needed. Rabbi Diamond is positing that Lavan is the example of a taker. So we had the givers, we have an example of a taker, and then a little bit about gratitude just to close us. Jacob has worked hard for Lavan. He has been tricked by him and has had to manipulate Lavan in return in order to provide for his family. Yet Jacob acknowledges that his success is not solely the product of his own efforts. It is only through God's grace that he, Jacob, has managed to survive and even flourish. It's easy to take for granted the generosity of others, whether out of a sense of entitlement, self-centeredness, or an unwillingness to acknowledge the role of others in bringing about our successes and achievements. we are particularly prone to be oblivious to the daily divine gift of existence itself. We need not wait for a heavenly dream to realize that God and God's angels, whether heavenly or terrestrial, are always present in our lives, guiding and supporting us in good times and bad. It remains for us to acknowledge what we have received and to use those gifts in the spirit of the love and care with which they have been given. I'm going to close with Rabbi Diamond. Shabbat Shalom.